How's everyone doing today? Mike here. So I've got a great video for you guys. Today what I want to talk about a little bit is just incorporating mushrooms into your life, whether it's on your home, your farm, your homestead, just to make yourself a little more self-reliant or a little more self-sufficient. There's just like, the world is wild, man. I feel like there's so many things always going on, whether it's a natural disaster we're dealing with somewhere, or maybe some kind of economic issue, a supply chain issue, maybe a pandemic. There's just so many things we've all dealt with, and I feel like anything we can do to make ourselves a little more self-reliant, self-sufficient, and just stronger is wise. And I want to talk to you guys about how you can incorporate mushrooms into your life to accomplish those things. Just being a mushroom farmer, I've got a lot of good information I feel like I can share with that. And there's a lot of ways we can approach this. So I just want to say, if anyone tuning in, if you are currently producing mushrooms, just to make yourself a little more self-sufficient or produce food for yourself, drop it in the comment section below and let us know how you're doing it. Let us know if you're doing it outdoors passively, if you've got like some nice indoor setup you're using, because you can do it all sorts of ways. But today I basically want to talk about outdoor passive cultivation and some indoor cultivation methods, and even doing it off-grid and even grid connected, because I am grid connected here. And before I set this up though, I did do a little off-grid growing just for fun. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Like I said, any of you viewers tuning in, if you've done any yourself, drop it in that comment section below. And if you're new to the channel, if you have not subscribed and you're just into mushroom farming or into mushrooms in general, click that subscribe button so you get more videos about mushrooms and farming like this in the future. Now, first, before we get into this, like I said, two methods. You can go outdoors with this, you go indoors with this. It's really going to depend where you are in the country, like what your climate is like, you know, what you're dealing with. And that would kind of be my decision if I want to cultivate mushrooms indoors or outdoors. I used to live in the Midwest, okay? Now, in Illinois and Missouri, kind of those areas where I came from, you can do passive outdoor log cultivation extremely easily, okay? Here in the high desert in the Rockies where I am now, not so much, all right? You could still pull it off if you really wanted, but it's kind of tough, all right? It would be much wiser to set up some type of indoor growing operation, all right? But anyway, let's just talk about outdoor passive cultivation for those of you that can do this, because this is a great method that is low input. You could either get logs or just inoculate stumps on your property with plug spawn or sawdust spawn. You could also make mushroom totems, okay? And I want to say I will have videos on this channel about how to do that, so be sure to tune in for those. But those are two great, easy, passive outdoor methods you could utilize to grow mushrooms on your farm, just to produce food for yourself and then a storage crop that you could potentially dry. Now, cultivating mushrooms outside, like I said about drying crops, a lot of times if you produce a lot of one species, they're all going to fruit at one time, okay? So you're usually not going to be able to eat all those at one time, but what you can do is you could dry and preserve some of those if you have excess. Another thing you can do with outdoor cultivation is you could cultivate many different species, okay? So you could make like garden beds. You could inoculate different species on different logs. So for example, for different logs, you could do things like shiitake, oyster mushrooms, lion's mane, chestnuts. For things like stump cultivation, you could do chicken of the woods, you could do maitake, you could even do buried maitake. I've seen people make beds of King Stropharia or the garden giant mushroom. So these are all great outdoor methods that you could use to produce your own mushrooms. And now I want to talk about another kind of low input, maybe you're off grid, okay? And I actually grew some mushrooms off grid here. When I first moved here, I actually stayed in a camper over at my father's property before I got a shipping container delivered to my property, and I lived here in the shipping container while I was building this building. But I stayed at my father's place for about a month, and there was a camper I stayed in there, and I decided to just do a little round of basically off-grid growing. He is totally off-grid at his place on his piece of property, and basically what I did is I prepared substrate and then I steamed it using a electric steamer that I made, and I'll show you pictures of this and everything. And I used a generator. I could have also done like a steel barrel and built like a fire underneath it if I really wanted to. Okay, but I had the ability to use the generator, and I also wanted to have an electric steamer just to use later on anyway. So I decided to make it for this instance. And then what I did is I grew some of the mushrooms. I let the bags colonize in his barn, actually. Okay, his barn. This was the middle of the summer. There's no electricity, no cooling in it, and I had no issues. Okay, his barn was at 8,000 foot though. Okay, so it really doesn't get over 80 something degrees up there. It stays pretty cool there all year round, and his barn is pretty well insulated. So I was able to let my bags incubate in there over the summer, and I had no issues, believe it or not. Just to let everyone know, all right? But let's take a few looks at those photos of me doing that off-grid grow, just to show that really anything is possible when you really want to do it. Because I grew mushrooms out here fairly passively in an off-grid situation in the high desert, all right? Let's check this out. All right, everyone, so here's my outdoor steamer running, doing my off-grid mushroom growing. You can tell I'm out here. This is about 8,000 foot elevation, and I am in the high desert in West Colorado doing this. Here's kind of a picture of the camper I was staying in at the time. And like I said, I just kind of prepared substrate out there on a table. I had one of those totes, those black totes. I had the dry material in one, water in the other, and I would just take a scoop of each and put it in the bag. Then I'd load my steamer up, and like I said, I ran this one on the generator. You could make a steel barrel and run it on a fire in an off-grid situation if you wanted to. But if you got a generator and you just kind of want to do it, you can also do this as well. I want to show you a little picture of the lab. This was inside my father's barn. And like I said, there's no climate control in this, but he is at 8,000 foot and it was really well insulated. So I was able to grow my spawn out and grow out my bulk substrate in the middle of the summer with zero means of cooling, and everything stayed fine. Actually, nothing contaminated. I didn't have any issues. This was all kind of a test, but it turned out really well, and I just wanted to share that with you guys. Okay, cool, everyone. So that was my first little go with off-grid mushroom growing. And I want to say, like I said, I put together that little steamer out there. You could see my simple table that I had made to make my bulk substrate. Like I didn't have a bagger or anything like that. I did run it off the generator, the steamer. But like I said, you could also just use a steel barrel and make a fire as well. I had about 20 or so 10-pound bags, a little over 20 10-pound bags of substrate in that 55-gallon barrel. And for those of you unaware, if you have about, I'm just going to use 20 for example, if you have 20 10-pound bags of bulk substrate, with gourmet mushrooms, you can produce about anywhere from 2 to 4 pounds on average out of those 10-pound bags. And even if we just say 3 pounds, okay, that's 60 pounds of mushrooms you could get out of that one barrel from steaming the bulk substrate, okay? Minimum, I would say 40, okay? You should always get like 2 pounds minimum from a 10-pound block, I'd say, with pretty much any species, even the low yielders. But something like a high yielder, you could get 3 to 4 pounds. So highly prolific. Now, I want to say my situation over there when I was staying off grid up there, and I was growing some of those mushrooms out in the barn there, I did have some that I would cut the bag and I would mist them, okay? But then I also did some in vitro growing. I did the in vitro growing with like king oyster and chestnut mushrooms. And I'll just say those turned out really well. Being a little drier environment over there, misting it, all the other mushrooms the other times was a little tougher and a little more demanding. I would say you want to set up like indoor grow rooms or like a little tent is what I would recommend if you could, just to make it easier on yourself. But I didn't have it over there and I still pulled it off, okay? So just to, even in the, not the most ideal situation, a lot of times you can still pull it off, but it's just best to make these situations ideal as possible. Now, I just want to talk about indoor growing a little bit now. So let's just say we could set up an indoor grow room. We're going to use a pressure cooker to make our spawn. And let's just say you're going to use a 55-gallon electric steamer that you made just to produce some mushrooms for yourself or your family, okay? Just as a means of being a little more self-sufficient, okay, providing, like I said, a little more food for yourself and maybe a storage crop. So if we're making our spawn and we're limited to just one of these and one of those 55-gallon drums for your bulk, let's just talk about using jars, okay? I was looking to see if I had a jar to show you, for example, but I really don't. But just about a quart-size mason jar, if you're using a 1 quart-size jar, you can actually fit 7 of those in here, okay? Now, 7 of those jars, I'm just gonna say if you have two cups of grain in each one, and you could probably fit a little more, obviously, but minimum, 2 cups of grain in each one. If you were gonna inoculate your bags with half a cup of spawn, you got 2 cups in each jar, 7 jars, that's 14 cups. You could inoculate 28 bags of spawn, okay, with 14 cups of spawn then, okay? So you could inoculate your entire 55-gallon steamer with the spawn you can make in here easily, okay? And I just want to say, even if you're cultivating with something like myco bags and you're making your spawn in myco bags, you could do 2 5-pound bags in here. You could inoculate, I inoculate 32 bags of 10-pound bulk substrate with 1 5-pound bag of grain. So you could do 64 bags of bulk substrate with 1 pressure cooker. And if we're just using the math like we used previously, and we're going to say 2 pounds of mushrooms on average from a 10-pound block, that's well over 100 pounds, over 120 pounds that you could make with just the spawn that you would produce with just this 1 pressure cooker. Okay, so highly prolific. All right. Now let's just go back to talking about the bulk substrate though. Let's just say we're doing 20 something blocks, like I said, for our family. Let's use the math that everyone in the family is eating 8 ounces of mushrooms a day. Let's say you got 4 people in your household. So then that means you're consuming 2 pounds of mushrooms a day in your household. 14 pounds a week, that's about 45, in a 3-week period, it's about 45 pounds roughly, okay? Your 55-gallon drum, okay, should be able to cover that need, okay, for 3 weeks for your family. Really, really efficient. And I'll just say, to do that, if you were trying to do like an every 3-week cycle, you'd want to do stuff like oyster mushrooms, lion's mane. Those are fast producers. You could even do things like stagger blocks and just use the amount of incubation time like to your advantage. What I'm kind of talking about is something like pink oysters are extremely fast. You can have a pink oyster block ready in about 2 weeks. A lion's mane block is about the same time frame. Blue oyster might take about 3 weeks. King oyster might take about 4 weeks. Chestnut might take about 6 weeks. Maitake might take about 7 weeks, 8 weeks. So like I'm saying, you can use all these different species to your advantage. So even if you don't want that many mushrooms all at once, you can inoculate your blocks with all these different species so they can incubate at longer time frames apiece, and you can almost stagger your production just based on the type of species you're growing. Okay, so you can use all these different little tips and tricks just to make yourself a little more efficient. All right, so think about that a little bit. Just think about how much you can really produce with one of these pressure cookers, maybe setting yourself up one of them electronic steamers like I said. You can just produce so much with those 2 little things right there. So that's one thing I wanted to share with y'all. So keep that in mind. And now, anyway, another thing is your leftover substrate. So after you grow all these mushrooms, okay, you're going to have leftover substrate. So what you can do with all your leftover blocks, instead of throwing them away, you can just take them out and compost them somewhere, or set yourself up a composter, and then you could take that compost and use that for garden soil. I have grown some of the best plants and vegetables ever with my spent mushroom substrate and mushroom compost. It's some of the best stuff that you will ever get your hands on to grow plants and vegetables, and it's like gold, man, seriously. So instead of just throwing that out, like I said, compost it, use it to grow some vegetables in. That way you can produce even more food for yourself, and then maybe you can even have some storage crops from that. And anyway, that was like I said, some passive means of growing, some off-grid growing, indoor growing, and then how you can utilize your waste substrate to even grow more food. So I feel like mushrooms can seriously be like an integral part of your homestead or your farm. And even if you're just living in like an apartment in the city or something, you can still pull some of these things off. All right. Like you could definitely be steaming stuff out on your patio, and you can make it happen. All right. But just as a mushroom farmer, I wanted to share some of these tips and tricks I had for everyone just to make everyone a little more self sufficient and a little more self reliable when we deal with wild events. Okay, so I hope everyone found this video helpful and informative. And if you did, please drop this video a like. Like I said, if you have any questions or anything like that, drop it in the comment section below. Or if you do cultivate mushrooms and you produce some for yourself and your family, let me know how you're doing it. Are you doing it like outdoors passively? Are you doing some indoor growing? Or what kind of method do you choose? If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, make sure you click that subscribe button. But that's all I got for you guys on this one, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.